This week, we heard from Sean Diddy Combs' ex, Jane, for the fifth week of the trial, and there was a request to dismiss a juror. We want to welcome back Neama Rahmani, a former federal prosecutor who's been following this case very closely. Neama, never a dull moment. And today, Kanye West, we should mention, made a surprise appearance to support Combs. Let's start there. What was the reaction to him showing up?
I think a lot of surprise, and I think most people want nothing to do with the Sean Diddy Combs trial, at least here in Hollywood where I'm sitting. And there's been speculation, rumors, innuendo, and yesterday Jane talked about having an episode in Las Vegas where she essentially attended a freak off with some other rapper, a famous rapper. She didn't identify him by name. The defense wanted to identify the other people that were present. So I'm not saying it was Ye, but there's a lot of speculation out there because Jane said it was an icon in the music industry, someone who was close to Diddy. So folks on social media are asking, well, is this common in the hip hop community, or is the defense trying to normalize this to get out of the sex trafficking charges?
And let's take a look at also that juror who was on the fence of whether they were going to be dismissed. Where did that land?
So this is juror number 6, who apparently has been less than candid, according to the prosecution. That's code word for lying, at least in non-legal terms. So the question is, here's an African-American male juror who is a 90s hip-hop fan. At least the defense thinks that this is a favorable juror, and the defense wants to keep him on. And apparently in the courtroom, he's been nodding during some of the favorable Diddy testimony. So we'll see if the prosecution has success in getting him booted.
If they do, when would that happen?
It could happen at any time in the trial. That's why you do have those alternates. Obviously, we're talking about a 2-month trial, and it's not uncommon for someone to get removed from the panel for any number of reasons. It could be self-selection because an emergency comes up, or it could be a problem like this where you have someone who may be a stealth juror, someone who wants to get on that panel, influence the rest of the jurors, maybe write a book, go on the talk show circuit after the trial is over. So I think the prosecution is going to continue to try to fight this fight to get who they think is an unfavorable juror off. We'll see if they're successful.
And there was so much powerful testimony this week, again, from Jane and also one of Diddy's ex-assistants, Jonathan Perez. What were the key takeaways from their testimony?
I think Jane was an important witness because she was the most recent victim. Up until the time Combs was arrested in September of last year, she had a romantic relationship with him, and she told the same story of physical and sexual violence. There was one episode where they got into a fight at her home and Combs beat her, similar to the 2016 video that we've all seen of Combs beating Cassie Ventura. And then she described similar episodes with the freak-offs as well. And the fact that it happened after Cassie filed her lawsuit, after Combs' Los Angeles and Miami homes were raided, I know the prosecution is going to argue in closing that this is someone who thinks he's above the law, even when the accusations were made and the criminal investigation had started. He thinks he can get away with this. Even when he was arrested, he had lots of baby oil and cash and drugs at that New York hotel because he thought he could turn himself in. So I do think she's an important witness. The defense is trying to paint her as a transactional OnlyFans model who agreed to do this, who knew what she was getting herself into. So it's going to be interesting to see how the jury sorts through all this.
On cross, what were some key moments for the defense?
I thought the defense got out some good testimony that this was really a love contract where Diddy agreed to pay Jane's rent, $10,000 a month, moved her from a small apartment into a large house, and bought her jewelry, bought her bags, and this is what she agreed to. Combs told her that he didn't want monogamy and that he wanted to be in a polyamorous relationship with multiple people. And here's someone that wasn't raped that really just regrets what she did. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm former prosecutor, victim's lawyer, but that's the argument. And I think, one of the big questions in this case is, well, if Cassie and Jane and Mia and all these women were sex trafficked, why did they continue going back to their abuser? That's an argument that the defense made with some success in the Harvey Weinstein case that we got a verdict in this week as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how jurors wrestle with that question. At this point, do you think that based on the testimony, the evidence, jurors have already made up their minds?
I do, and there's different counts, so let's just go through them. I think prostitution, that's proven, that's a given, and I think if the defense only loses on that, they would consider that a win. Next you have RICO, and racketeering is important because you can get to racketeering in many ways that don't necessarily involve sex trafficking. You can get to racketeering by drug trafficking, prostitution, bribery, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, extortion, right? We heard Cassie Ventura's mom talk about that. And arson, of course, that was Kid Cudi's testimony. So I think there's a clearer path to RICO. Sex trafficking is probably the hardest count because of some of the evidence and the emails and text messages that maybe some of this was consensual, that it wasn't forced, it wasn't coerced. So I think the jurors are going to have a tough time with the sex trafficking count in this case.
This case has really opened up a whole new world that a lot of us didn't know existed. We didn't even talk about the King Knight Hotel setup. We'll skip that for now. What should we expect next week?
I think we should expect more of Diddy's employees. This is the fifth assistant who's testifying, the most recent witness up until the time that he was arrested, Jonathan Perez. And I expect the prosecution to actually wrap up their case in chief next week. We all were questioning, would we hear from another victim, Gina? Turns out that she's probably not going to show up, whether she was afraid or embarrassed or paid off. And Christina Joram, who was Combs' chief of staff. The question was she going to testify against him? And maybe that answer is no, because if she did, she'd probably take the majority of the week next week. So we'll probably see some more law enforcement witnesses, some former employees, maybe some security guards, and the prosecution will wrap, and the defense will take 2 to 3 weeks to put on their case.
All right, Neama Rahmani, I know you'll be watching all of it, and we look forward to talking to you next Friday. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Michelle. Have a great weekend.
You too. We'll be right back.